Hello and welcome to Monday of Holy Week. As we've spoken about over the last few days, we are now heading on that really tough journey with Jesus as he moves towards the cross. And in many Christian traditions, this is a time where people stop. They pause and think about that journey that Jesus took. They think about the pain, the anguish, the burden, and they think about how that affects them now and in our life and context. So the Stations of a Cross is a term often used, but really it's walking the way of Jesus. Later on, you're going to see some images, and some of them are quite dark, and you may think, ugh, a bit disturbing. But those would have been disturbing days. Imagine Jesus stood amidst the crowds baying for him to be crucified. Imagine how he felt, surrounded by people jeering him on his way to the cross. They would have been difficult moments. So I encourage you to try and engage with the images and listen to the words that are being spoken. Let them breathe into you. Thinking about not only Christ and his journey, but you and your journey, me and my journey. What it means for our world today, that Jesus went through those steps on the way to the cross. Do feel free to pause the segments if you come to a section that you really want to stop and meditate and think quietly for a longer period of time. Just pause, spend what time you need with God and journey on when you're ready. Let us walk the way of the cross.
Jesus is condemned to die. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them. And after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Jesus was captured at night, taken away by soldiers, stripped of his garments, interrogated, tortured, crowned with sharp thorns, and now handed over to be condemned to death by Pontius Pilate. Death on a cross. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. We name the crosses of today. Jesus is condemned unjustly by those who did not understand him, and by those who were frightened of what he did and said. Perhaps they sensed that this man could make a difference, that he could turn their world upside down. We continue to condemn people unjustly today. People are condemned because of the colour of their skin, their gender, their sexuality, their beliefs, because they were born with a disability, because they don't conform to our way of thinking. The list is endless. there are also the people who have been justly condemned, who have been found guilty, served their sentence and asked for forgiveness. Does our society really forgive? Really believe that people can change? Or do we continue to condemn them over and over and over again? Jesus, what a terrible injustice to see you condemned to death. Your own people, the Roman judges and the soldiers, didn't recognize that you were the Son of God. Give us the grace to see, respect, and love you in all people, both innocent and guilty. Change our hearts, that we may see with new eyes those we might otherwise condemn. Jesus takes up his cross. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. Jesus was led away carrying the cross by himself. A cross is not just a piece of wood. It is everything that makes life difficult. Jesus carried the crosses of his life without complaint. As a poor person and as an itinerant prophet. In the calm and courageous way, he put up with the threats of the Pharisees and the lack of understanding of his own disciples. In the way that he carried all the burdens of his life, but in particular, the way in which he carries this awful, final burden. He transforms the cross from a symbol of condemnation into one of liberation. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross, you have redeemed the world. There are burdens that we all carry. Some are very obvious, and others we take great care to hide. There are the burdens of illness, pain, and disability, of old age, dependence, and caring for someone who no longer knows who we are. There are the burdens of constant fear, of loneliness, of isolation, and in these days, the fear of shortage, the fear of a virus ripping around our world. The invitation of Jesus on the cross is to hand over these burdens to him. May we see your presence, Lord, in all the burdens we carry today. Help us to share our burdens more freely, not to be afraid to acknowledge our fears and our pain. May we be more aware of the crosses that others bear and make time to alleviate their burden. May your face shine on each one of us through the crosses we bear. Jesus falls for the first time. Jesus falls. Here, Jesus shows us that being heroic does not mean staying on one's feet at all costs. Being heroic means getting up again after falling and starting off on the road chosen. Human beings will never resign themselves to stay flat on the ground. Like Jesus, they will get up again, pick up their crosses, and keep on searching. In our time of change, when we adjust to living indoors, when we get used to working from home, when our children play in our homes, not our streets, we know that we can get up day by day and face these challenges as we keep on searching for a promised land of total liberation. And we work towards the day where our world is a freer place again. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. We name the crosses of today. Look at Jesus fall under his cross. He might have fallen into the gutter or be slouched in a doorway on Skid Row. He doesn't look much like God there. But he didn't look like God when he fell into the dirt on the way to Calvary either. The crowds look on with disdain at this man, whom they see as a sinner, who has been condemned to death by the authorities. Like the crowd, we often have only condemnation and rejection for those we see as sinners. We judge them without knowing about their trials, scourging and crowning with thorns. Do we even suspect the part we might have played in knocking them down? What do we do to help them? Jesus, it's easy to see your image in saints. Help us to see you in the sinners too. You had a place in your heart for the Samaritan woman, for Zacchaeus, and for those who crucified you. Give us this same compassionate heart. Jesus meets his mother. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus and his mother meet, they just look at each other. Words cannot express how they feel. What he saw in his mother's eyes must have hurt more than the raw pain of his wounds. This, for Jesus, is the most painful time of all. This is his bereavement. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. We name the crosses of today. Jesus carries the heaviest burden of the loss of his family, the sundering of the earthly, loving relationship between mother and child. This was not of his making. The violence inflicted upon him etched into the very heart of his mother as she watched the agony of her son. We see Mary's pain in the mothers and fathers who watch their children giving up their life to drugs, addictions, and suicide. In the women and men who suffer violence and the ongoing threat of violence in their home from spouse or child. We see Mary's pain in the mothers gazing at their children in refugee camps, without water and sanitation, without hope of health. And we see Mary's pain in the families now amongst us, unable to hold the hands of the loved ones as they die. And in the eyes of those unable to attend funerals and bury their dead. We pray, Jesus, we remember the gaze that rested between you and your mother. In that moment of pain, there was also a moment of deep and enduring love. Jesus, give us the courage to bring that love into the deepest recesses of our homes, to our children and to our spouses, our partners, to those places of fracture and disharmony in our circle of relationships. Simon helps Jesus. They compelled a passer-by who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Simon the Cyrene, a stranger in the city, did not know Jesus. But that did not matter. What matters here is that in this moment of need, Simon was capable of lending his shoulders to one whose own had given out, of offering his strength to one who had nothing left. of taking on himself the cross, which Jesus could no longer carry. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. We name the crosses of today. Look at Jesus, who lies hidden and unknown beneath every person in need. Across our world, we see human suffering in the faces of strangers, in the faces of those struggling for democracy in the Middle East and beyond, in the faces of those dealing with the loss of life and destruction of property. People we know of, but do not know, must live with the aftermath of the ravages and destructive forces of nature, coping with floods and droughts and fires, with all the devastating effects of climate change, the crisis that can seem so distant and yet is here, now, everywhere, for everyone. Lord, help us to grasp our opportunities to be Simon in our world. In those times when we can help, let us have the generosity to do so. May we continue the spirit of Simon through our support of agencies who work to alleviate suffering in our world. In the actions that we take to bring about change, may we carry the burdens of those less able to cope. Lord, may we have the humility to accept all the Simons along our road who reach out to help us in our own moments of need.
Having walked together so far, let us pray. Loving God, we thank you that we are able to walk with you. We can barely begin to imagine what you went through. And yet we can imagine lifting our own cross, the burdens of our lives that sometimes feel too heavy for us to bear. And Lord, as we think about you stumbling under the weight of your cross, we thank you that you got back up and carried on. Lord, help us in these times of crisis, of isolation, of fear and of illness, to get back up every day, to do what we must to help one another, to put our trust in you. And Lord, as we think of the images of Jesus looking into the eyes of his mother, we think about the care we have each for each other, family, neighbours, strangers. Help us to find the enduring love that you have for us, that we might see it in others and step forward for you. For we ask this in the name of Christ. Amen. Do join us again tomorrow as we continue on the way of the cross. Bye for now.